Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spannerman again here with another video. Hope you enjoyed the video today. Please subscribe to the channel. Any comments, thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Spannerman again here with another video. Today we're going to do a tutorial on hand filing for the beginners. And for the beginner, there can be some things there that, you sort of scratch your head and say, oh, do I use this or do I use that or how do I go about doing this? So hopefully I can go over all the areas and get you on track. So first of all, we need to talk about the different pitch sizes of chains. So there's different chains out there and you really need to know what file fits what. So if I go over that, hopefully that can put your mind at ease. If you don't know what chain you got, you're really unsure, you probably need to take it down to your local shop or get someone that knows. You need to know what size chain you got. And a lot of the times the markings on there really don't tell you. So that's the first thing you need to find out. Okay, so we'll go over the different sizes. When we talk about pitch, they say the method is that you measure 3 rivets, any 3 rivets, it doesn't matter what they are, and you divide it by 2, that's your pitch. That's the way that it's been done. So we'll talk about the different sizes. So the smallest size that you can get is your 1/4 inch mini. That takes a 3.5 millimeter file or a 1/8 in the imperial size. The standard 1/4 inch takes a 4 millimeter file or a 532. 3/8 low profile chain takes 4 millimeter or a 532. Then you go to 0.325 chain, that takes a 4.8 millimeter file or a 3/16. Then you go to 3/8 standard, so that takes a 5.2 millimeter file or a 13/64. And last but not least, a 404 chain uses a 5.5 millimeter file or a 732. So I've just covered the chain sizes and the relevant file sizes. Now when a chain's brand new, especially when we're talking about the 3/8 standard chain, you can use a 5.5 millimeter file. Then when the tooth wears down about halfway, you can swap to a 5.2. That's fairly common because if you look at a tooth actually has a slope on it. So if we look at that, you'll see that there's a slope on the tooth. And that's the reason why you can go to a smaller file. If we talk about a 0.325 and they take a 4.8 millimeter file, there are manufacturers out there that produce a 4.5 millimeter file, so you can find them. But in your low profile, the only thing that you could do is go in the low profile 3/8. She takes a 4 millimeter file, or the 1/4 inch standard also takes a 4 millimeter file. You could possibly use a 1/4 inch mini file, which is 3.5 millimeters. But I have brought both those files for the 1/4 inch mini, and they're generally a little GTA 26 hand pruners by Still and other manufacturers out there, Milwaukee and that make the little tiny hand pruners with a very small 1/4 inch mini chain. I've measured files 3.2 millimeters and 3.5 millimeters, so they can vary. This is a 3.2 millimeter file. I'll just sit it on there. Very, very small file. So we've covered the file sizes, and then most of your good brand Swiss files, if you actually have a look at I don't know whether you can pick it up. I'll just see whether you can see it. It should have, this one. I don't know whether you can see this or not, but we'll see whether you can. I think you can. I'll just try and hold it. See, 732 Velobe. You can read that. And if we take well, that's a 732. This is a 5.2 millimeter file. No, that's a no-name brand. This one hasn't even got one either. It's got, look, it's got a symbol on it. That can be a problem if you're not sure. This Velobe is a 4 millimeter, 530. You can see where it says 532. So just be aware of that not all files come marked. what I do have, we'll just zoom back out, is that I made this plate up here, file gauge plate, that I can check all my files. You can buy at certain shops where they do sell chainsaw equipment a plastic card that's usually got that in there. Now, one thing about files. Files these days, most of them are case hardened, and you're lucky if you get a couple thousand strokes out of them. Going back over 20 something years ago, they were made out of much better high carbon steel, and you found out that you could get up to about 5,000 strokes out of them before you had to throw them in the rubbish. The files have got like fish scale edges on them, and those little tiny fish scale edges break off during their use. So, and that's how they become blunt. Worst thing you can do with a file is put pressure on it and pull it back, because you can damage the file. So just use forward motion. It's okay to pull the file back very gently on the tooth. That won't cause any damage, but don't put any pressure on it. At best, I would say these days you'd be lucky to get 2,000 strokes out of a file and throw it in the rubbish, at best. So, okay, we're going to talk about filing. This is a 3/8 chain that you can see here. If we zoom in, one thing about when you do file a tooth is that you've got to keep your gullets cleaned out. And your gullets are this part that's down here, right here. So as you file the tooth back, you've got to try and make sure that this is clean. So on your initial filing, you look at the tooth, and if the gullets look okay, then you don't have to worry about filing it. So there's a few things to do when you look at a tooth, and yeah, I can explain it to you, but you've got to feel it. So it's very hard when you're trying to do a tutorial or a video and show people what to do, because they can't feel what you're feeling. I can only describe it to you, and hopefully that you can pick up on it. Now, before we get into the filing, I need to talk about the top plate angle. The top plate angle is this angle that you see here. Every chain has that top plate angle, and it's generally about 30 degrees is the most common worldwide. 25 degrees is probably the next. 25 degrees is better in harder wood. 30 degrees is better in softer wood. A lot of people stick with the 30 degrees. This is a full chisel, meaning that it's got a square shoulder on it. To me, full chisel is best filed at 25 degrees. Because the pointier this point becomes, the less forgiving that it is. It'll get blunter quicker. Whereas we look at a semi-chisel, you'll notice it's got a nice, beautiful rounded corner. And this is what we refer to the working corner here. So once this working corner becomes blunt, then you need to sort of sharpen up. It's the first part that hits the timber, so it's the first part that gets all the abuse, so therefore it'll go blunt quicker. We'll get to talk about that later on, about whether or not to use a full chisel or a semi-chisel. That's a little bit different subject, but it's still file related, because we'll get into that. So we've just discussed about the different files that you can use and the angle that you can use. The other thing that's really important about a file when you're doing a chainsaw chain is the file needs to stick between 20 and 25% above the top of the tooth, so that you get the right angle right on that trailing edge. So on this edge here, you need to get that right angle. That angle is roughly 60 degrees. It's like this. So this very edge here, right on here, this very edge here, as the file will leave a 60-degree angle, and that's your cutting angle. That's the angle. It's also, its technical name is referred to top plate cutting angle, not to be confused with the top plate angle. So yeah, you've got this angle here by looking down on top, and then you've got this angle down here that the top plate has an angle. Now, the other thing is, you may have noticed on some of my files I've got different colours. It's a good idea that if you've got a 5.5 millimetre file or a 5.2 that you have different colours, because I tell you what, you can pick them up, they nearly look the same. Now, when we spoke about those different file sizes before, as I said, if you've got a brand new tooth on a 3/8 chain, you can use a 5.5mm file, and as the tooth wears about halfway down, you can swap to a 5.2. So you can reduce the file size as the teeth reduces about halfway. So we've spoken about the 25 degrees or 30 degrees. We're going to stick with this chain here is a semi-chisel, and that means you can see the curve on there where my thumb is. So therefore we are going to use a 5.2mm file on that, and that is the grey tipped one here. So what you can do, and you may see sports people do this, and you can do this on your hand filing. When you hold a file, you need to hold the end in one hand and by the tip on the other, and line it up as best as possible. A lot of the times, we'll see whether you can see this, there's usually a little mark on the top of the chain. Sometimes it's etched in there by laser, so just see whether you can see it. You can see it there where my fingernail is. I think you can see that. There's a little tiny line there. That's the end of the life of the tooth, but it's also at the right angle. So that's one thing to remember. So, okay, for a semi-chisel chain, you need to keep your file as flat as possible. So when you lay it in there, keep it flat, not this way, not down. And you need to make sure that it's at the right angle. So remember, we said that semi-chisel will be 30-degree angle. So that's the angle that we're going to file at. And you should have that little etched part on there. Now, I can push that file with no pressure all day, and I won't file. So a lot of times when you're filing, I like to get behind the chain. So I'm standing behind here, and I'm looking down at that gap. So I can push lightly without any filing, just to get in the groove like that. You'll see a lot of people that play golf that'll swing the club before they hit the ball just to sort of get the feeling. You may get, it's the same as someone that shoots a gun. They'll look through the eyesight and try and line it all up. Someone that does plays billiards, and they'll get the cue and they'll go backwards and forwards before they actually strike the ball. So if you want to get in the groove, it's quite easy just to do a few strokes like that without any pressure whatsoever, and you could file there all day and it won't do a thing. Won't take any metal off, not until you apply pressure. So you can get in the groove. So just try and line it up, get in the groove. Now, when you feel like you're in the groove, it's up to you whether you want to take the file off. I'm taking the file off. Some people do it this way. They go like that and pull it back like that. You do that all day. It won't do a thing to the file. It won't do a thing to the tooth. So once you've got in the groove and you go, yeah, everything's good, what you need to do is look down here. Don't know whether you can see that. Whoops. And if you can see a little gap in between the file and the tooth, because I'm trying to keep this about 20% above. So when I'm filing, I've got to look at the tooth, and maybe the bottom, the gullet, needs a couple of strokes. So if the bottom needs a couple of strokes, I'll give it a couple of strokes. And if I pull it away, that's one of the reasons I like to pull the file away, because if I pull the file away, I can sort of look and say, yep, that's okay. Right, so the first couple of strokes could be just to clean the gullet up. Now what I'm going to do is pull the file towards me, and depends on, if I believe that it's not filing this edge, I'll lift it up. So I'll push it in and up. So if I push it up and in now, especially up, I want to try and get an edge. Now I can see iron filings on that edge. That is a nice sharp edge now. I don't know whether you can see some iron filings there. We'll just see whether the camera picks that up. Hang on. There's a couple of iron filings there. So I don't know whether you can see them or not. But that looks good. So For the people that are a beginner, you need to just examine that and make sure that you've filed down here and it's nice and sharp. You can actually feel it. If that's okay, then it's just a matter of going to the other one. Now, what a lot of people do, and you need to do it before you start, I should have mentioned that, is just get the texter and mark it so you know where. This is a 20-inch chain, so there's 18 teeth aside, so I need to mark it first. So now I look at the other one, and you'll notice the gullet there, if you actually zoom in, got a little bit of a hump on it. So I want to sort of clean that up a little bit. Now, a lot of times it can be a little bit difficult. Just want to file that gullet, the rest of that hump away. So there's a smooth transition when it's cutting through the timber. Look, that looks pretty good. That's all you need to do. So then, okay, just a matter of getting back in the groove. I can see a little tiny gap there, so I need to pull the file up. So pulling the file up, in towards the tooth and up. Starting to get onto that edge, taking metal off. Looking good. That's what you need to do when you're filing. So we'll go to this one. So what you need to do, pulling the file into the tooth and up. And you'll see the file right on that edge there, taking metal off. So just get in the groove, get the feel. I can see by doing this that I need to pull the file up again. So now I'm putting pressure on the file, lifting it up. The angle on this one looks like it's out a little bit, so I need to file the front a bit, right? So it's on that angle. I need to come back a little bit, so I need to file the front a bit. Don't count the strokes. Now I need to bring the file up. Needs a bit more. Still needs a bit more on this one. That's better. Yep, that looks pretty good. So, don't ever count your file strokes. You'll hear people, Stu will tell you, Oregon will tell you. This is what they'll tell you. I'll say, look at your worst tooth, examine the chain, find your worst tooth, mark it, and because it could be damaged, and file them all the same length. Now, in principle, that would be the correct thing to say, because if people filed them all different lengths and did not check their rakers, I'll guarantee it'll cut crooked. So what I'm telling you is don't count the file strokes. Sharpen the tooth until it needs, if it takes 10 or 15 strokes, so be it. It's 10, 15 strokes. Because after this, you need to check the rakers with a progressive raker gauge. And the progressive raker gauge, like all raker gauges, sets the height between the relationship between the actual raker and the top of the tooth, the working corner. So I'll just put that into this position here. This little jig that I made up works all right because I don't like filing a tooth or a chain that's jumping around, flapping around. Now obviously when I don't have a camera on, I'm going a lot faster than this. Probably only take about 7 minutes to do a actual chain. So it would be the same thing. Oh, that one's not sitting right. I'll just loosen that again. You will develop your own rhythm, and hopefully you don't develop any bad habits. Bad habits meaning that some people use a file and they end up filing too low into the gullet and even filing the tie straps. That's what I mean by about bad habits. Or they start filing and get their angles wrong. You can't see it, but I'll show it to you. At the back, you'll see these little lines here. They look like triangles. You'll notice it's got 30 degrees, 30 degrees. So when I'm filing, you can't see it, but you can now, while I've got my file, I can see that whether this tooth is filed at the right angle. That is 30 degrees. And I'm looking down here to see if there's a little gap where the file touches the top plate cutting edge. I can see there's a little tiny gap at the back. So what I need to do is hold it at that and remove that metal at the front of the tooth. Now I'm lifting up. Yes, that's nice and sharp. So that's what you have to learn to do, is to lift the file up into the tooth. Don't make the mistake of pushing down. So when I go to the next tooth, and as I said, what I'm trying to do is teach you how. I'm looking here to see whether this gullet needs filing. So if it needs filing, I might just run the file over in a couple little spots. And if it looks okay, then as I put the file on here, I want to look at this gap here. This gap here. So to try and do that, we'll see if we can do a close-up shot so you know what I'm talking about. This is very, very important in hand filing. So that when I put the file up like this, what I'm looking to see if there's a gap like that or a gap like that. And I've got to make sure that the file is sticking up that 20%. So if I can see a little tiny gap, then I know where I've got to apply pressure. So the moment that I so when I go onto this tooth, I just don't get the file and just start going crazy. I place the file on there and it takes a split second to see that the file is right up against that edge. So I know that I only need to do a couple of strokes. I've looked at it before I've placed the file in. The gullet looks pretty good. You'll even notice, actually, if you zoom in there, and this is what I was saying about before, you'll notice that I've accidentally touched the drive link. That's quite common for people to do that. So yeah, I probably filed the gullet a little bit too deep there, filed it right down there, so it's quite easy to do that. So placing the file in, I've looked at this tooth. At the back I know I'm lined up 30 degrees and it looks pretty good. So it's just a matter of now lifting this file up and lifting it up and pulling it into the tooth simultaneously. So I'm going out on this angle here, like a 45 degree angle. So lifting it up is 90 degrees or 0 degrees. Let's just say that this is 90 and this is 0 degrees here. So if I lift it up, I'm lifting it up to 90 degrees. And if I move it this way, I'm moving it 0. But if I move it 45 degrees, so in other words, I'm moving at a 45 degree angle, I'm applying the force at a 45 degree angle rather than vertical or horizontal. That's probably the better words to use. So if this is vertical and this is horizontal, I'm applying the force right in between on a 45 degree angle so that the file will bite into the top plate cutting angle, which is right this edge here. That's the part you want to file. And you've got to make sure you're keeping your file nice and straight, because let's not neglect the side plate. This side plate is just as important, because if this side plate is dull, it's not doing its job. So this side plate's got to be razor sharp as well. So all this whole edge here has got to be razor sharp. So that's how you file a semi-chisel. So if we take the semi-chisel off, we'll put a full chisel on. It's exactly the same, except we tilt the file down 10 degrees angle. And the 10 degree angle slightly changes the profile so that the top of the tooth, now this chain is absolutely worn. There's no life virtually left in it. It looks like a bunch of little tiny triangles. So it's exactly the same principle. I hold it here, and the only difference is that I tilt it down 10 degrees. The 10 degrees downward tilt, and again, I don't know whether I can sort of demonstrate this in the video, but we'll give it a go anyway. I've done it before in other videos, but let's see whether you can pick it up. When I put this file into the tooth, and I drop down 10 degrees, you'll notice that the back portion where my thumbnail is exposed. So if I continue filing at this angle, you'll see that it's going to take metal off the front of the tooth before it comes back in contact with the back of the tooth. So when we hold the file horizontal, so in other words, when the file is held horizontal like that, it's level with the edge of the tooth. When we tilt down 10 degrees, can you see that gap now? That's roughly 10 degrees. So this is an enlarged tooth. So what I'm trying to show you is that the file is going to file more at the front before it comes in contact with the rest of that tooth. I'm going to have to file at least 0.5 millimeter off that tooth before it comes in contact. And that's why it's not a good idea that you change angles, because any time that you swap between, say, 25 and 30 degrees, you're going to have to file off more metal, and that could be a waste. You're going to reduce the life of the chain every time that you decide that you're going to change between 25 and 30. So if you've got a chain, this is a full chisel chain. Full chisel chains, I do not run at 30 degrees. I can, but the problem is that the point will be pointier at 30 degrees. It'll get blunter quicker. I prefer to use full chisel in medium to hard wood. A lot of the times they say full chisel is really better for softer medium timber. I prefer to use full chisel even in hard wood. I don't buy cheap quality chains. I only ever buy high quality chains. And if I buy full chisel, I want my full chisel at 25. I buy them at 25 degrees. I usually buy them in a 100-foot roll. So the only thing that I'm going to do is make sure that I've got a 10-degree downward tilt. I'm just wondering, just bear with me for 10 seconds. I'll go get a chain that's filed 10 degrees downward tilt and one tooth that's standard, and I'll show you the difference. Okay, back, sorry about that. We've just got the chain here. Okay, I showed this in one of my other videos, but I'll show it again. If you look at that tooth on the left and the tooth on the right, can you tell which one has had a 10 degrees downward tilt? We'll zoom in or get a little bit closer between the two and we'll see whether you can pick it. So that's that tooth there. And that's that tooth there. Can you tell which one has been filed with a 10 degrees downward tilt? This one here has had the file at horizontal. This one here has had the tooth, the file held at 10 degrees downward tilt. You'll notice that the point of the full chisel is not as pointy as this one. This one has a bit bigger beak, what we refer to as hook or beak. It's got more of a hook on it than what that does. What that actually does when we talk about the hook or the beak is, if we look at the metal right in front, it's probably best displayed on a larger tooth. If we look at the front of the tooth, this metal underneath will support that edge. If that beak comes in too deep, what you'll find out is that the metal of the point can actually bend. Now, just wondering whether I've got a tooth that I could show you. Yes, I've got one here. I did this deliberately on this chain. I used a small file. Have a look at that. How ridiculous. Can you see? It looks like a little needle. Now, if that hits a bit of timber, that's going to bend. So when I spoke before about, that's probably got a 4 millimeter file in it. Let's just have a look. It is too, look. There you go, look at that. This is what I was saying about making sure you use the right file. Can you notice that that file is almost level with the top of the tooth? Remember I said before that the file, so if we were to put, the file for that should be a 5.2 millimeter. Have a look at the difference. You see where the file sticks well above the tooth, about the 20% mark. So have a good look at that. That's a mistake you don't want to be making. You file a chain like that, I can tell you what, in 2 minutes, it's all over. Only another one little tip that I've got there for people there. I don't know whether you've seen it. Little golf ball. Not a bad idea. You put them on the end of your file. Fits beautiful into your palm. Yeah, really good control. Yeah, not a bad idea. You can find them. Sometimes you go walk down the street, you can find one. Sometimes the birds pick up the golf balls thinking they're eggs or something, and they're going to eat them. And then they find out that they're hard as a rock, and then they just drop them anywhere. So, yeah, many times I've gone for walks around the park and find golf balls for that reason. Now, I did mention before about using a raker gauge. So the raker gauge that I use is a progressive raker gauge from Stihl. You've also got one from Husqvarna. So this one's from Husqvarna. It's a roller gauge. The whole idea of this is that you place this on top of your chain and get it around the right way. You place it on like that, and then you proceed to lay the file in the correct groove. Hang on, we'll just get that right. Hang on. Yeah, this one's not for this chain. Yep, sorry about that. The whole idea is that you place this over the chain, and you've got to be very careful using these because not one fits all. So this one here is for a different chain. So yeah, it's not. This is for a 0.325, so it's not going to fit on here properly. It's the same as the Stihl. These progressive depth gauges, they're the same. You can see I've got that stamp 3/8. This is only for a 3/8 standard chain. It's not for any other size. There's 5 different sizes for the 5 different chains. These work much better than this type of gauge. This type of gauge is called a constant depth gauge because you see where it's got 0.65 of a millimeter. It's only ever going to remove 0.65 of a millimeter from the beginning of the start of the life of the tooth to the end of the life. Whereas this is called a progressive depth gauge, and it will remove more than, well, it'll remove a maximum of about 1.2 millimeters, probably where it is at the moment. There's a hard and soft setting. I'm on the hard setting. This is the soft setting. There's a left and right window. So obviously the upper part of the gauge here, the upper side of the window is for the left side. If you move to another tooth, it will be the right side. This is highly recommended that you use this over this type of gauge. I couldn't stress that anymore, that as a hand filer, whether you use a grinder or not, it doesn't matter whether you use a grinder, you really do need to use one of these. You can't avoid it. Anyway, look, I don't think there's much else I could say about hand filing except the Stihl. There is another gadget out there, and Stihl manufacture it. It's a little bit different. I personally don't like using them. It's a little cage that you place over your chain like that. And on here is a Stihl file guide. And this file guide has got markings on it. You'll see you've got 10 degrees here, 30 degrees there, 30 degrees here, and 10 degrees. Whole idea is that you place it on top, line it up with the tooth, and proceed to file. What the idea of these is for people that are really hopeless at trying to work out what 30 degrees is. That's the whole idea of them. They're there for that reason and that reason only, for people who can't file properly. The only thing that I would say is that, look, I'm not a big fan of this little cage, but there's nothing wrong with using one of these. or even buying one and having it, because it's got the 30-degree marking on it. Notice before when I spoke about 25 degrees, there's no 25-degree markings on that. It's 30 degrees, because 30 degrees is the most popular. So if we look at this 30-degree mark here, you line that 30-degree mark up with the exactly parallel with the bar on your chainsaw, and you just proceed to go forwards, take it off and on. Look, they're a great idea if you need a reality check and you think, oh, I'm not 100% sure if I'm filing at the correct angle. This will get you back on track. So you can always say, this is for 3/8, so as you can see, 5.2 or 13/64. Great idea. Use it for checking purposes if you believe you're off track. You can actually see the tooth looking through that window. It's a little bit difficult, but you can see it. Maybe the camera can pick that up. We'll just see whether you can see that tooth through there. And we'll just try and get that. I think you can see it there if you actually see. I'll line that up on the 13. There's the 13. If you look underneath, that's the tooth. You can see the tooth right there where the 13 is, right there. So you can see whether you're holding it parallel. You can see that line there. So that looks about straight now, pretty straight. But this won't line up perfect on the 13 because, I don't know whether you can see it now. I filed this at 25 degrees. As I said before, all my full chisels are filed at 25 degrees, so it doesn't line up perfect. Do it on the semi-chisel. Should line up a lot better because the semi-chisel was done at 30 degrees. Yeah, look, you can see that much better. Much better. See whether you can see that on the 13. There it is. If you can see that tooth. See how you've got your 30-degree line here. So hang on, line that up perfect. That's perfect now. There's my line there, parallel with a bar, and there's the tooth. So there's my line there. As you can see, it's lined up with the bar, and there's the tooth. Look, this tutorial on hand filing's gone for 37 minutes. Quite a long time. I really hope I've covered every aspect of hand filing. The only other thing that I will say before I go, make sure you get yourself a file card like this. This is great for cleaning your files out. Yes, you can tap your files. People do that to try and dislodge any filings, but it's a good idea that you use one of these file cards. Clean your file. Anyway, I hope that helps. If there's any comments or anything that you think that I've missed, I'm really love the comments, because one thing about the comments, if you put a comment in there, you'll get an answer. If it's not from me, you may get it from someone else, but I generally answer everyone's comments. Is you may have brought something up and somebody else may answer it and it addresses that problem, so we can all learn from each other. These videos are to help you learn. So I'll just recap one last thing. Yes, you'll be told by many chainsaw companies that you look at your worst tooth, mark it, and file them all the same length. This is told to you to be systematic. The reason being is that if you're told to file every tooth the same length and you do your rakers, it guarantees that it'll cut straight. It's foolproof. Everything all being equal. And that's the whole idea. That's what the company's trying to tell you, making everything equal. And if everything is equal, it will cut perfectly dead straight. But there is an alternative to that. And the alternative is you don't worry about if one tooth is slightly longer than the other. But you must make sure that you use the raker gauge and best with the progressive raker gauge, because the progressive raker gauge is going to, and even a normal raker gauge will do it, but the only reason that a normal raker gauge doesn't work as good as a progressive raker gauge is because these type raker gauges here sit on 4 teeth. So when you sit it on a tooth, it's sitting on this, it's sitting on 4 teeth. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. If the teeth are different heights, then this may not sit perfectly dead straight. There'll be a slight error. Never measured the error, but nonetheless there'll be a slight error. If you use this type of gauge, there is no error because it sits on the individual tooth. It's not influenced by the previous tooth or the one behind it. The other thing is, and you probably don't know this, and this will be something new for the new people, that a progressive depth gauge will take a lot more depth off the rakers as the tooth progressively gets shorter and shorter, because when a tooth strikes timber, it has a rocking motion. As you strike the tooth, you'll find out that the depth gauge will limit, it'll strike the timber and will limit how much the tooth can cut. But as the tooth's tilted on this angle, it can't take any more, and then it, through rotational forces, it'll be pulled straight again till it hits another bit of timber and takes another bite in there. So it's got this rocking motion as it's going along the bottom of the chain cutting timber. So they all do that with this rocking motion. And as this rocking motion, as the tooth gets shorter and shorter, you're getting very, very close to the pivot line. And if you have a look at some of my teeth and you go right in, you are behind the pivot line, getting very close to be behind the pivot line. When you get in behind the pivot line, you can push this tooth will push up quite easily. So as it strikes timber, as it wears down, it gets very easily to rock up. And that's why you need graded depth. And that's where the progressive depth gauge comes in. And that's the whole idea about it. This type of flat gauge here was invented by Joseph Burford Cox in Portland, Oregon in about 1953, and put a worldwide patent on it. It was hardened. This is hardened to 62 Rockwell as well, and he's had a little adjust. He had 2 versions. He had one that looked like this. It was 25 thou at one end, 30 thou on the other end. It never had little windows like this. This is just what Stihl did. This is not a bad idea. And going back about 12 or so years later, there was a guy called Ray Carlton from Carlton Chainsaw Company that invented the progressive depth gauge. It looked a little bit like this, the window and the little legs on there. Same principle, exactly the same. It's almost identical, just looks a little bit different that it sits on there. Now, the other thing is, you may notice, if you look at one of these gauges, you'll see this little part in the middle. That little part in the middle that's got a bit of a cutout is for dual rakers. Some chains out there, especially the smaller profile ones, have dual rakers, as they're called safety chains or anti-kickback or low kickback chains. Look, I think that's enough. It's been 43 minutes, which is actually quite a long talk. I hope there was bits and pieces in that you can get out of that for the new people. As I said, this is just for the new person. The other thing is, if you're going to file your chainsaw on the ground, it's a little bit fiddly. The other thing is what a lot of people do, you put the chain, you tension the chain up on your chainsaw if you're going to file it on your chainsaw. So tension it up so that it's a little bit more harder to move along. The harder it is to move along, the more stable it will be. And they put the chain brake on, and you can put the bar into a vise like this. So, you know, you might have a vise like this, and you put the chainsaw in there and you can proceed to file it. You really need this up fairly high so that you've got great eyesight. If you do it on the ground, some people put it between their legs. There's a big distance from the ground level up to your eyesight. You're much better off having this up reasonably high, about no more than about a foot away from your eyes, so that you can look down upon it and really get a good view. That's fairly critical, because if you haven't got a good view, then you're liable to make mistakes. take it easy. Only one last tip, and I'll just say that one more time, and that is that when you put a file in here, just remember that you can have your warm-up strokes, that you can sit there all day with virtually no pressure, just to try and make sure that you're in the filing groove. Because you'll be surprised when you first start off, if you haven't filed in a while, you could be a little bit on the wobble. You might get the wobbles up a bit. So it's best just to try and get in the groove. This doesn't do anything. You're not going to file anything off the tooth. Once you feel that you're in the groove, then you can get serious and start applying the upward, the vertical and horizontal pressure, and go 45 degrees in between until you file off that top plate cutting edge, and you get that exactly razor sharp, simultaneously doing the side plate at the same time. Look, thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye for now.